Hey guys, so today we're actually gonna do some basic Photoshop, and the first step is to learn how to cut people out for scalies. Uh, in this case, cut yourself out. So hopefully you have five photos that you prepared, and also they have some sort of pretty uniform or easy to cut out background like this. Um, so here I have two photos from a while ago. I think this was when the Matrix was coming out, so we were sort of obsessed with the Matrix. Yeah. So cut me some slack here. Okay, so I'm gonna actually kind of show you a couple different methods. There's no real sort of right way to do this. Everyone has their own workflow, I'm aware, and some of you might already know this stuff. So in those cases, then you know what to do. But I'll show a couple different ways of doing this. But the first thing, you might have a slightly different interface because of you guys have a newer version. I'm running CS5, you guys have 6, but it should be fairly similar. But when you bring in a photo like this, usually, and you know you're going to kind of work on it with layers and all that, first thing you want to do is actually just unlock the background. So by default, when you bring it in, on the lower right is your sort of layer managers layers panel, and by default it should be locked. It has a little lock icon here. So what you want to do is basically double click on it, and it'll bring up this new layer, blah blah. You don't really need to change anything, and just say okay, and then it'll go from background to layer 0, right? Now this little eye thing on the left basically allows you to show or hide a layer. And when you hide it, you see that it has the checkerboard background, which means it's transparent. Okay? So this is the first thing you want to do with any of these. Now, it used to be the sort of old school brute force sort of way to kind of do this. It was actually just like, so on the left here are your tools, the toolbar. This is the rectangular Marquee tool, and when you sort of just hover over it long enough, it'll actually show you the tool names and their hotkeys, right? Which you should actually get used to. It makes life a lot faster when you use the hotkey. But for the video, I'll try to come over and click on things, or I'll tell you what I'm doing. The other things, same with all these, the ones that have a little triangle on the lower right, basically, mean that you can click and hold down your mouse, and when to pull out flyouts, and some of these basically have additional stuff. Right? So yeah, it used to be the sort of old school way was actually to kind of use a mixture of the eraser, which is here, the eraser tool, E, or and this rectangular Marquee tool is basically kind of select stuff and just use the delete key, or the delete key to delete stuff out, or just use the eraser tool. Actually, you have to have the layer active or have it selected, and then I'm using the rectangular Marquee tool and the delete to just kind of delete all big portions first, like that. And granted, this is sort of like the dumb way, but just sometimes you'll still have to resort to this. And then I'm typing on E, the shortcut for the E, and use the eraser tool, and you can go in and erase stuff, right? And this is sort of slow. You can click here to choose brush size, brush hardness. There's a sort of softer brushes like that, but you probably don't want that in this case. You can click on your brackets, the left and right sort of brackets, to change your brush size and sort of do that, right? But this is sort of really slow and painful, painstaking, blah blah, and it's really sort of prone to mistakes like you just saw. For those who aren't familiar with this, this is the history panel, and with the history panel you can always sort of backtrack, go back to a sort of earlier state, as long as you don't execute a new command. It won't erase stuff. You can go back, you can go forward, like that, right? So it's a pretty sort of cool thing, or pretty nice thing to have, being able to go back in time, basically. With any of these tools, holding down the space bar makes it the pan tool with a sort of little hand, so you can move stuff around. And zooming in and out is Control plus, Control minus, like that. Okay, so that's this basic navigation. All right, so like I said, this is sort of like dumb way. It's sort of painful, and you probably don't want to do this. So I'm just gonna click here in my history to go back to the initial state. One of the other sort of older versions was basically using this, either the lasso tool, which is kind of this sort of drawing method where you can select regions, right, and then delete out regions, you know, like that, which, you know, is also kind of manual. It only really works if you have a stylus or Wacom, something like that. The magnetic lasso tool sometimes will work. So in this case, you can basically, it kind of tries its best to kind of follow an outline a little bit, right? It's not perfect, but you can sort of slowly basically sort of delete out regions that way. You know, that's another way of working, and you'll see these are sort of different ways. And some people actually kind of use the polygonal lasso tool, just basically click, and they'll sort of zoom in a little bit. And these sort of selection edits, and you'll see that you can always actually go back and add to them. Let's see, where's the, can't find the beginning now. Oh, there you go. So these sort of selection edits, you can always add or subtract from them by basically holding down the Shift button. That means you're adding a region, like that, or holding down the Alt button, and you'll see the sort of little minus sort of symbol, which means you're subtracting from the selection, right? So you can actually use this and basically sort of slowly add to your selection if you wanted to, and sort of go through and, you know, basically do that. And to be honest, it's, if you have a good background, this is, you know, this is a way of doing it, but personally I think at this point it's a little bit too painstaking. It's only necessary if you really have no other option, right? So you can do that. Okay, so, you know, this kind of allows you to like select out your figure and basically like move it elsewhere, or, you know, delete the background. But that's sort of all kind of difficult to use. So here are, this is your lifesaver. Both the magic wand tool, which we used to use a lot, but actually more recently the quick selection tool. So the magic wand tool works like this. It sort of samples pixels, and when you click anywhere, and to deselect things, you basically click on Control D. So I'm going to revert the state. So you can select anything, and it basically samples the pixels around it to kind of guess. It does its sort of best guess as far as, you know, selecting similar colors or similar pixels. There's a tolerance here on the upper left where it basically kind of controls its sensitivity or how unsensitive it is. So so you'll see if I change the tolerance to something much higher, like 30, and I click, it'll actually select most of the sky, you know, it's except for the transition part. So with this, you can actually very easily, at least in this case, you can pretty easily just, you know, hold down the Shift key to add to the selection and click elsewhere, and you see that I'll add that in somewhere else. So in this case, just with, actually you'll see just with 3 or so clicks, and you can kind of ignore that. I mean, you can add this if you want. With 3 or 4 clicks, I've basically selected, actually in this case, all of the sky And maybe I can add like this in the middle, right? So at this point, right now I have the background basically selected, and you can either just delete out. Say okay, right? And actually, in this case, I forgot to unlock the background, so we should do that first. So same thing, click. Oops. And you might experiment a little bit with like the click locations, so sometimes it'll do a better or worse job, right? And in a case like this where you just have some stragglers, right, you can switch to the rectangular marquee tool and add to it to basically add that out, and add in all of the sort of this bottom part. And so now you have basically most of the background selected. And let's change back to the magic wand and shift click here to add that little triangle. All right, so you delete and Control D, and that's roughly what you would do. Obviously you'll see here, for example, there's a little bit of the blue that's getting selected back in, right? So if you want to refine that edge, what you can do is either use the, let's say in this case, use the polygonal lasso tool, L. So in this case, you'll want to actually subtract from this over selection that the magic wand did, and so you can basically sort of trace through the outline. And I'm doing this really roughly. Trace through that outline to make sure, okay, it doesn't eat into the shirt too much. Okay, delete that. Control D to unselect. V to get this move tool, and you'll see that this is me flying around, right? So that's one way. And you can always basically sort of, I would, in this case, usually just sort of like position this like that. Use the crop tool here, C, to kind of recrop the boundaries. Do that, double click. Oops, yeah, double click, and you can save that as a PNG. So save as. So the scaly _01, and you can save a PSD if you want, but I think for something like this we can save it as a PNG, and it will give you this option. Just say okay, and you'll get a scaly. Now one of the things here is that you can actually go in and refine this selection if you want. But usually I'll combine that with another method that I'm going to show you guys really quick here. Okay, so that's one. Let's look at this example. Okay, so yeah, this is the quick selection tool, which is kind of like a more advanced version of the magic wand. It's pretty cool. It's very useful. So you'll find that for an image like this, and yeah, remember to unlock the background. Yeah, so you get this. So here, the way this works is kind of, it also has a brush size, so you can make this larger, smaller, and in the same way you kind of paint your selection, except instead of like the previous one where you actually, with a wand, where you actually had to kind of hold down the shift key to add to a selection, this you just sort of progressively build it. And in this case, you'll see it actually does a pretty good job of boundary detection. And so I'm just sort of clicking on the hand, the legs, and sort of adding to it. You can zoom in a little bit. and you see like it grabs sort of these larger regions pretty well. Once it gets to these sort of smaller parts, you can actually just like, not just click, but drag it a little bit across certain regions. When it gets to really smaller stuff, then you can, come down here and change the size to something smaller. You can actually change the hardness as well, which basically changes its sensitivity a little bit. And click it like that. Get the fingers. And don't actually worry about that too much just yet. You can see it grab the head with one click. And so in this case, we're actually kind of selecting the body instead of the background, right? But eventually you'll see how we do this, that we'll be able to actually invert it. So this is the rough selection, and there are some small things that are not perfect, but it's okay. Don't worry about it just yet. And usually, and you'll see that, okay, there's parts of here where, okay, there's some strands of hair, that sort of thing. And this is the sort of nice part. I would kind of zoom in a little bit. But what you want to do is actually click on this refine edge here, and you'll see it gives you this display as well as a window. And here, what you want to do is actually, in this mode, what you want to do is actually kind of paint over and just sort of like do that. Click and drag and just basically kind of paint over the parts of the edges where you want Photoshop to kind of pay more attention to the edges. And so actually just this, and it will give you this sort of display which you can actually change here. Is it like this sort of overlay view or on black? I sort of like on black. I think it's just easier to see. And change the size of this brush a little bit, but it just sort of forces or kind of tells Photoshop to kind of redetect that edge a little bit, which is sort of nice. And so you can kind of go around, and you don't have to do it everywhere, but especially just like in those boundaries where like there's a little bit of weird stuff going on, that will help in a lot of cases. So just do that, especially the sort of jaggedy edges. So yeah. Okay, so after you've done that, you'll actually see that here, for example, with the hair, it has a sort of rough outline, but there's a little bit of sort of fuzziness there. So there's a couple settings you can play with. I guess the first one to start with really is this, decontaminate colors. And if you kind of mess with amount, you'll see that this sort of halo, which is sort of coming from the background, will actually start to disappear after you kind of give it a more like something like 80 or 90, something like that. It starts to recede a little bit. But at the same time, you can actually change this sort of smart radius edge detection and do something like maybe 1 pixel. As well as actually 2 other things. Smooth the edges a little bit, maybe 0.5. Or actually 1, and feather it. So feather the edges, so 0.5 pixels. And the shift edge will actually kind of move, and if you kind of actually look at, if you look at where the head is, shift edge will actually kind of change the boundary of the sort of cut selection. And sometimes basically what you may want to do in many cases actually kind of move it into the negative, so it basically sort of recedes a little bit, negative 20, 15, 20 or so maybe. It'll sort of ensure a pretty clean cut, right? And once that's done and you're sort of actually happy with what you're getting, and you don't have to, you can mess around with and just sort of arrive at some sort of values that you're happy with. But make sure that this is actually done. You can either do new layer, but I like to actually do this new layer with layer mask. Say okay. We probably overdid some of the edge selections there in this case. But what's really nice about this method is that because this creates a layer mask, and we'll actually get more into the detail about what the layer mask means, but you'll see on the right side of this in the sort of layer display, this sort of black and white display. This basically is a representation. It's sort of like an alpha channel mask, so what's black is cut out, what's white is left in, but you'll also be able to do basically in-betweens or grayscales. And so because of that, this is actually a way of deleting that you can actually revert, or you can paint back, if you will. So what you can do in this case is actually use your paintbrush tool, B. Oh, that's gigantic, so make it smaller. And using a white color here, this is the sort of color picker, this is the white color in the in basically the foreground. The upper left is white. You can actually, let's say here, I got some transparency there, you can actually paint it back in. So that's stuff that was maybe, I probably went a little bit overzealous with the edge refinement settings a little bit there, you know, and so if you're actually kind of missing stuff, or you want to bring stuff back in, this is actually a good way to kind of get it back. So, and because this is a sort of more non-destructive way actually of cutting people out, you can always, the reverse of it, and so in a situation where, you know, maybe I would accidentally bring back too much of the background, so I painted back some of the sky here, right? Then it's really easy, just move this, or actually in this case, just switch the background color, right? Or just pick a black, make it black. And with the black, you can basically, it's the same as erasing. The black, you can sort of paint stuff back out. So the basic sort of principle to remember is that white, with a layer mask, white paints stuff in and black paints stuff out. And so you can, but the real sort of thing about it is that that allows you, and you can actually show your original sort of in the background, right? If you activate that layer and make it semi-transparent, then you can sort of actually use it as an overlay, just say to kind of get a better handle of like what you're missing or what you haven't gotten back. But it's a really, really effective way of doing this. And the real nice thing is that you can always, you can always get it back. Now, the one thing to really remember if you're trying to do this is that you need to click here on the black part on the mask to make sure the mask is active before you do this. Otherwise, it won't work. You'll just be basically painting black and white back onto things. So you can do that. So that's another way. And this you'll see at this point I can actually discard the bottom layer. So I'm just left with this, right? And the same thing, I can crop it down to that, and obviously you'll probably do a better job with sort of refining the edges and whatnot, and save as PNG. Same thing, scaly 1, scaly 2, and save that as a PNG. All right, so you'll have 5 of these, and eventually, depending on your sort of section image, you might want to adjust it. And this is something that we often do, is go to Image, Adjustments, Hue, Saturation, or Control U basically to bring this up. And you can actually just bring down the saturation, so to kind of try to unify the look with your section drawing or your section image if you want, or maybe even just bring it all the way down to grayscale, right? So yeah, those are some quick and easy ways of doing that. As I sort of just mentioned, like this one in particular, I probably overdid the edge detection, but that's the general principle, and you should basically end up with, you know, a set of scalies that are yourself and probably look like this. All right.